The son Jacob and his wife Laura wanted to get rid of Alice's elderly mother and mother-in-law. So on her birthday they manipulatively moved her into a nursing home. They wanted to take her money and her home, but they didn't take into account the fact that Alice had a plan of her own. She took back control of her own life, and Jacob and Laurie begged for forgiveness. Alice Crow's hands sank into the sticky dough, the warmth of the kitchen wrapping around her like a familiar embrace. The scent of vanilla curled through the air, mingling with the soft hum of the oven. Her fingers, dusted with flour, trembled slightly, not from age but from the weight of anticipation. This was her 58th birthday, and she wanted it to be perfect. She kneaded the dough for her favorite lemon chiffon pie, the one she'd made every year since Jacob was a boy. But this time something felt off. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that pressed against her chest. The kitchen was her sanctuary. Wooden cabinets polished to a soft gleam, a stack of mismatched family plates on the counter, and her embroidered dish towels folded neatly by the sink. Yet a sleek coffee machine, Laurie's not hers, sat on the counter like an intruder, its blinking lights mocking her. Alice glanced at it, her lips tightening. She pushed the thought away and focused on the pie, her hands moving with practiced grace. Still at it. Laurie's voice sliced through the quiet. She stood in the doorway, one hand on her hip, her blonde hair swept into a perfect bun. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor as she stepped closer, eyeing the flour-dusted counter with a faint smirk. "You're taking forever, Alice." Alice's hands paused, the dough clinging to her fingers. She forced a smile, though it felt brittle. "It's for tonight," she said, her voice soft but steady. "The pie's always been a tradition." Laurie raised an eyebrow, adjusting her hair. "Traditions are sweet, but you're not as quick as you used to be. Maybe let me handle dinner next time." Her tone was light, but the words stung like nettles. Alice's smile faltered, but she turned back to the dough, her knuckles whitening as she pressed harder. She wanted to snap back, to remind Laurie this was her kitchen, her home. Instead, she said, "I've got it under control, Laurie. But thank you." Laurie lingered for a moment, her gaze flicking over the cluttered counter, then left without another word. The air felt heavier in her absence. Alice exhaled, her shoulders sagging. She glanced toward the living room, where Jacob sat slouched on the couch, his phone glowing in his hands. His legs were propped on the coffee table, a careless sprawl that clashed with the tidy room. At 32, he looked younger than his years, but his face carried a weariness that tugged at Alice's heart. "Jacob, honey," she called, wiping her hands on her apron. "Could you help me set the table?" He didn't look up. "In a minute, Mom," he muttered, his thumb scrolling across the screen. Alice waited, hoping for more, but he stayed glued to his phone. She turned back to the counter, her chest tightening. This wasn't like him, or at least it hadn't been. She opened a drawer to grab a rolling pin and paused. Tucked beneath a stack of recipes was an old photograph, its edges worn from years of handling. She pulled it out, her breath catching. It was her and Jacob, maybe 8 years old, at a picnic by the lake. His gap-toothed grin beamed up at her, her arms slung around his shoulders, both of them squinting into the sun. She'd given up her job at the library to raise him, pouring every ounce of herself into his world. Now that boy felt like a stranger. She tucked the photo back, her throat tight, and returned to the pie. The radio on the windowsill crackled, playing an old Ella Fitzgerald song that reminded her of dancing in this kitchen with her late husband. The memory warmed her, but it couldn't shake the unease creeping in. She wanted tonight to be special. A family dinner, laughter, maybe a moment to bridge the gap she felt growing between her and Jacob. And Laurie. "Jacob," she tried again. Louder this time. "What about inviting your cousins? We could make it a real party." He sighed, still not looking up. "Whatever you want, Mom," he said, his voice flat. Alice's fingers curled around the edge of the counter. She opened her mouth to press him, but Laurie's voice cut in from the hallway. "Alice, don't overdo it. We're keeping it small, right?" She reappeared, holding a glass of wine, her smile sharp. "No need to stress yourself out." "I'm not stressed," Alice said, a little too quickly. She smoothed her apron, her hands betraying a slight shake. "I just want us to have a nice evening." Laurie's smile didn't waver, but her eyes were cool. "Good. Because we need to talk about something important at dinner." She paused, sipping her wine, then added, "Something that can't wait." Alice's stomach twisted. "What kind of talk?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You'll see," Laurie said, turning toward the living room. "Let's just enjoy the night first." Alice stood frozen, the dough forgotten. Her heart thudded, each beat laced with dread. She wanted to believe it was nothing. A trivial matter, a misunderstanding. But Laurie's tone, that calculated edge, lingered like a storm cloud. Alice pressed her hands to the counter, steadying herself. This was her home, her family. Whatever was coming, she'd face it. She had to. Alice carried the lemon chiffon pie to the dining table, her hands trembling despite her efforts to steady them. The living room glowed with soft light from a chandelier, its crystals casting delicate shadows on the walls. Balloons bobbed in the corner, their bright colors a stark contrast to the tension coiling in her chest. She'd spent the afternoon decorating, stringing garlands, setting out her best china, arranging her embroidered napkins with care. But the room felt cold, the warmth she'd hoped for smothered by the weight of Laurie's earlier words. Something important. Jacob and Laurie sat across from each other, their faces lit by the flicker of candles. Jacob's eyes stayed fixed on his plate, his fork idle, while Laurie sipped her wine, her lips curved in a faint, unreadable smile. Alice forced a smile of her own, setting the pie down with a soft thud. "Here we are," she said, her voice brighter than she felt. "I hope you're hungry." "Looks nice," Jacob mumbled, barely glancing up. His shoulders were hunched, his fingers tapping restlessly against the table. Laurie leaned back, her eyes glinting. "Very festive, Alice," she said, her tone dripping with something that wasn't quite praise. She cut a sliver of pie, her knife scraping the plate. "Let's make a toast, shall we? To new beginnings." Alice's heart stuttered. She raised her glass, the wine trembling in her hand. "To family," she said softly, her eyes searching Jacob's face. He didn't meet her gaze. The clink of glasses echoed, too loud in the quiet. Alice took a sip, the wine bitter on her tongue. She tried to fill the silence, her words tumbling out. "Remember when you were little, Jacob? You'd sneak into the kitchen and steal bites of this pie before it was done." She laughed, but it sounded hollow. Jacob shifted in his seat, his jaw tight. "Yeah, Mom," he said, his voice clipped. "A long time ago." Laurie set her glass down with a deliberate clink. "Speaking of time," she said, her smile sharpening, "we need to talk, Alice. You're not getting any younger, and this house, it's a lot for you to manage." Alice's fork froze halfway to her mouth. The air seemed to thicken, pressing against her skin. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. Laurie leaned forward, her eyes locked on Alice's. "You're struggling, Alice. We've noticed. The cleaning, the cooking, it's too much. We've found a place where you'll be taken care of." She paused, her voice softening with false warmth. "A nursing home." The words hit like a slap. Alice's breath caught, her fingers clutching the edge of the tablecloth. "A nursing home?" she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. She turned to Jacob, her eyes pleading. "Jacob, what is this?" He finally looked at her, but his gaze was fleeting, darting to the table. "It's for your own good." "Mom," he said, his voice low, almost mechanical. "You'll be safer there. They've got staff activities." "Safer?" Alice's voice cracked. "This is my home. I raised you here, Jacob. I let you and Laurie move in when you needed help. And now you're—" She stopped, her throat closing. Laurie's smile didn't waver. "We've already taken care of the details," she said, reaching for a thick stack of papers at the end of the table. She slid them toward Alice, the motion smooth, practiced. "This is the agreement. It's all set." Alice stared at the document, her vision blurring. The logo of a nursing home stared back at her, its cheerful font mocking her. Her name was scrawled at the bottom, a signature she hadn't written. Her heart pounded, a dull roar in her ears. "You forged my signature?" she asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. "We handled it for you," Laurie said, cutting another piece of pie. "Less stress." Alice's hand shook as she pushed the papers away. "No," she said, her voice rising. "This is my home. You can't just decide." "It's decided," Laurie interrupted, her tone sharp now. "We're doing what's best." Alice turned to Jacob, her eyes burning. "Jacob, please. Tell me you didn't agree to this." He looked away, his jaw clenched. "It's done, Mom," he said, his voice barely audible. The room spun. Alice gripped the tablecloth, her knuckles white. The pie sat untouched, its golden crust a cruel reminder of her efforts. She wanted to scream, to throw the papers across the room. But her body felt heavy, pinned by betrayal. The family photos on the wall, her and Jacob laughing, her late husband's smile, seemed to mock her. This was her home, her life. And they were tearing it away. She sat there, alone in the silence, as Laurie and Jacob cleared their plates and left the table. The candles flickered, casting long shadows. Pain seared her chest, but beneath it, a spark of anger flickered. They thought they could erase her. They were wrong. Alice stood in her bedroom, the suitcase open on the bed, her fingers lingering on the embroidered quilt she'd made for Jacob when he was a boy. The room smelled of lavender and old wood, a scent that had comforted her for decades. The wooden bed frame gleamed under the morning light, and family photos lined the dresser, snapshots of a life she built brick by brick. But now her world felt like it was crumbling. She folded the quilt, her hands shaking, and placed it in the suitcase, each movement a quiet act of surrender. A sharp knock broke the silence. "Time to go, Alice," Lori called from the doorway, her voice clipped. She leaned against the frame, her arms crossed, her eyes scanning the room with a proprietary glint. "This'll make a great walk-in closet." Alice's breath hitched. She glanced at the dresser, where Lori's makeup brushes were already scattered, claiming space that wasn't hers. "This is still my room," Alice said, her voice low but firm. "For now." Lori's lips curved, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Not for long," she said, stepping inside and running a hand along the bedpost. "We're making changes." Alice's fingers tightened on the suitcase handle. She wanted to snap, to demand respect, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she zipped the suitcase shut, the sound harsh in the quiet. She needed to see Jacob to make him understand. She brushed past Lori and walked to the living room, her steps heavy on the creaking floorboards. Jacob stood by the window, his back to her, hands stuffed in his pockets. The morning light cast his shadow long and thin like a stranger's. "Jacob," Alice said, her voice trembling, "please look at me. Tell me you can stop this." He didn't turn. "It's settled, Mom," he said, his voice rough, almost angry. "You're going. It's better this way." "Better for who?" Alice's voice broke. "I opened my home to you. I gave you everything. And now you're throwing me out." He flinched but didn't answer. The silence cut deeper than words. Alice's eyes burned, but she refused to cry. She turned away, her gaze catching on the hallway mirror as she passed. Her reflection looked older, smaller, a woman she barely recognized. The walls, once hung with her paintings, were bare, the frames stacked in a corner like discarded memories. Outside, a car horn blared. The driver from the nursing home was here. Alice paused at the front door, her hand on the knob, and looked back one last time. The house, her house, felt like a museum of her life, every corner holding a memory. She stepped outside, the door clicking shut behind her, a sound that echoed like a gunshot. The drive was a blur, the suburbs fading into the sterile outskirts of town. When the car stopped, Alice faced a squat, gray building with a sign that read, Sunny Hills Care Center. The name was a lie. There was nothing sunny about the place. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant, sharp and cold. A board administrator handed her a key and a pamphlet, her voice monotone as she rattled off rules. "No personal furniture," she said. "Meals at 8, noon and 6. Alice's room was a box. White walls, a narrow bed, a plastic chair. The window overlooked a parking lot, the asphalt shimmering in the heat. She set her suitcase down, the thud echoing in the emptiness. Her hands shook as she unpacked, pulling out the quilt, a few clothes, and the photograph of her and Jacob at the lake. She held it, her thumb tracing his childish grin. The boy she'd raised was gone, replaced by a man who wouldn't meet her eyes. She sank onto the bed, the springs creaking under her weight. The room pressed in, its sterility a stark contrast to the warmth of her home. Grief clawed at her chest, but beneath it, something else stirred. A quiet, stubborn resolve. They'd taken her house, her life, but they hadn't taken her. Not yet. She clutched the photograph tighter, her jaw set. This wasn't the end. Alice sat alone in the dining hall of Sunny Hills Care Center, her fingers wrapped around a cold cup of tea. The room was a sea of gray walls, gray linoleum, gray light filtering through smudged windows. The air smelled of disinfectant and overcooked vegetables, a sharp contrast to the warm vanilla of her kitchen. Around her, residents shuffled to their seats, their voices a low murmur, like distant waves. She felt like a stranger, an outsider in a place that was now her home. Her eyes traced the cracks in the plastic table, avoiding the faces of those around her. She didn't belong here. Not yet. A sharp voice cut through the hum. "This slop again? You'd think they're trying to poison us." An older woman with a crown of silver hair slammed her tray down at a nearby table, her eyes flashing. The outburst startled Alice, but a reluctant smile tugged at her lips. The woman's defiance felt like a spark in the sterile air. The woman caught Alice's gaze and grinned, her wrinkles deepening. "You new girl," she called, waving a bony hand. "Come sit. You look like you need a friend." Alice hesitated, her fingers tightening on the cup. But the woman's warmth, sharp as it was, drew her in. She stood, her chair scraping the floor, and crossed the room. "I'm Alice," she said, settling at the table, her voice softer than she intended. "Marge," the woman replied, winking. "Welcome to the palace." Her eyes were bright, alive in a way that defied the sagging skin around them. She gestured to the two others at the table. That's Roy, our resident grump, and Clara, who sees everything but says little. Roy, a wiry man in a faded blazer, grunted without looking up. His hands, rough and calloused, toyed with a spoon. Clara, small and birdlike, adjusted her glasses and offered Alice a shy nod, her fingers twisting a napkin. The table felt like a small island in the vast, cold room. Marge leaned forward, her voice dropping. So, Alice, what's your story? Nobody ends up here because they want to. Alice's throat tightened. She glanced at the others, their eyes on her, waiting. My son Jacob and his wife Lori, she began, her voice trembling. They lived in my house. I thought we were family. But they... She paused, the words heavy. They sent me here. Said I couldn't manage anymore. Marge snorted, her fork clattering against her plate. Sounds like my daughter, she said, her tone bitter. Convinced me to sign over my savings, then dumped me here so she could travel Europe. Roy looked up, his eyes narrowing. My girl sold my house out from under me, he said, his voice gravelly. Told me it was for my safety. Safety my foot. She's living in my place now, with her deadbeat husband. Clara's voice was barely a whisper. My son took my bank account, she said, her fingers stilling on the napkin. Said it was for my care. I haven't seen him since. Alice's chest ached, their stories mirroring her own. She hadn't expected this. Strangers who understood her pain. They forged my signature, she said, her voice steadier now. Put me in here and took my home. I didn't even get a say. Marge's eyes blazed. That's theft, plain and simple, she snapped, slamming her hand on the table. They think we're too old to fight back. Roy leaned back, his fingers drumming on the table. I've seen schemes like this, he said, his tone measured. Back when I was a detective. People think they can hide their tracks, but there's always a trail. Bank records, property deeds, check those, Alice. You might find something. Alice's pulse quickened. Find something, she asked, leaning forward. Like what? Roy's lips twitched, not quite a smile. A reason they wanted you out, he said. Money, property, power. Follow the money. It's always the money. Clara nodded, her eyes sharp behind her glasses. Be careful, though, she said softly. They won't like you digging. The words settled over Alice like a chill. She looked at her new companions, their faces etched with loss but also defiance. For the first time since leaving her home, she felt a flicker of belonging. She wasn't alone. Later, in her room, Alice sat on the narrow bed, the springs creaking under her. The walls were bare, the small window letting in a sliver of dusk. She held the photograph of her and Jacob, his boyish grin a painful reminder of what she'd lost. But Roy's words echoed in her mind. Follow the money. Her fingers tightened on the frame, her jaw set. I'm not done yet, she whispered, her voice fierce in the quiet. She wasn't sure how, but she'd find a way to fight back. Alice sat on the edge of her bed, the dim light of a single bulb casting shadows across the bare walls of her room. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of disinfectant. Her phone buzzed on the plastic nightstand, a sharp sound that made her jump. She grabbed it, her heart pounding as she opened the message. It was from her bank. Transaction alert. $5,000 withdrawn from your account. Her breath caught, her fingers trembling as she read the words again. She hadn't authorized this. Roy's voice echoed in her mind. Follow the money. She stood, her knees unsteady, and slipped on her shoes. The nursing home's library was her only hope. A cramped room with a dusty computer that might let her see what was happening. The hallway was quiet, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead as she hurried past closed doors. The library was at the end of the corridor, its door slightly ajar. Inside, the air smelled of old books and mildew. A single computer sat on a rickety table, its monitor flickering like a dying star. Alice sat down, her hands hovering over the keyboard. She wasn't tech-savvy. Jacob had always handled her online banking, but she couldn't stop now. She typed in the bank's website, her fingers clumsy, misspelling the address twice before getting it right. The login screen appeared, and she entered her credentials, holding her breath. The screen loaded, revealing her account balance. It was lower than it should have been, much lower. Her eyes scanned the transaction history. There it was, the $5,000 withdrawal, dated yesterday, and another $3,000 a week ago. Her heart raced as she scrolled further, finding a transfer to an agency called Bright Horizons Realty. Her house. They were selling her house. Her hands shook, the mouse slipping under her fingers. She clicked on the transfer details, but the information was vague, just a reference number and a date. She grabbed her phone and dialed the bank's customer service, her pulse thudding in her ears. The line rang, then clicked to a robotic voice. Please hold, it said, looping music that grated on her nerves. Finally, a human answered. First National Bank, how may I assist you? The operator said, her voice flat. My name is Alice Crow, Alice said, struggling to keep her voice steady. There are unauthorized withdrawals from my account. Thousands of dollars. I need to know what's happening. Do you have your account number and identification? The operator asked, her tone unchanged. I don't have my ID with me, Alice said, her frustration rising. I'm in a nursing home. But this is my account. Someone's stealing from me. I'm sorry, ma'am, the operator said. But without verification, I can't provide details. Visit a branch with your ID. Alice's grip tightened on the phone. You don't understand, she snapped. This is my money. My home. They're taking everything. I'm sorry, ma'am, the operator repeated, her voice a brick wall. That's all I can do. Alice hung up, her breath ragged. She stared at the screen, the numbers blurring as her eyes burned. She wanted to scream, to smash the monitor, but a soft creak behind her made her turn. Marge stood in the doorway, her silver hair glowing under the fluorescent light. Trouble with the bank? Marge asked, her tone light but her eyes sharp. They're worse than my grandkids, always after something. Alice managed a weak smile. They're stealing from me, she said, her voice breaking. My son, his wife, they're taking my money, my house. Marge sat beside her, the chair groaning under her weight. That's low, she said, her voice softening. But you're not alone. Talk to Roy. He sniffed out worse scams than this. He'll know where to start. Alice nodded, her chest tight. Marge's presence was a lifeline. A reminder that she wasn't fighting alone. She logged out of the computer, the screen going dark. Back in her room, she sat on the bed, the photograph of Jacob in her hands. His smile mocked her, but her anger burned brighter than her pain. You'll pay for this, she whispered, her voice a vow. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was ready to fight. Alice crouched behind a scraggly rosebush in the nursing home's garden, the morning air cool against her skin. The garden was a sad patch of wilted flowers and cracked benches, but it was quiet, away from prying ears. Her fingers trembled as she dialed Tom's number, her old friend and a lawyer she hadn't spoken to in years. The phone rang, each tone tightening the knot in her stomach. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting Lori or Jacob to appear, though they were miles away in her house. Her house. Alice. Tom's voice crackled through the line, warm but surprised. It's been ages. You okay? She swallowed, her throat dry. No, Tom, I'm not, she said, keeping her voice low. I'm in a nursing home. Jacob and Lori, they forced me here. They're stealing from me, taking my house. I need your help. A pause, then Tom's voice hardened. That's fraud, Alice, he said, his tone sharp with outrage. Tell me everything. She poured out the story, the forged signature, the unauthorized withdrawals, the realty agency. Her words tumbled over each other, her fear mixing with anger. They've taken thousands, she said. And my house, they're selling it. I saw a transfer to some agency. Tom let out a low whistle. This is serious, he said. We can challenge this, but we need evidence. Bank statements, property records, anything showing they acted without your consent. Do you have access to any documents? Alice's heart sank. They're in my house, she said, her voice tight. Jacob and Lori are living there. I can't just walk in. Then we need a plan, Tom said, his voice steady. Start with what you can access, bank records online maybe. But don't confront them yet. If they're pulling this off, they'll cover their tracks if they know you're onto them. Alice nodded, though he couldn't see her. I'll try, she said. Thank you, Tom. Be careful, Alice, he said. And call me as soon as you have something. She hung up, her pulse racing. The garden was still, the only sound the rustle of leaves in the breeze. She stood, brushing dirt from her knees, when a shadow fell across her. Roy stood a few feet away, his hands in his pockets, his eyes narrowed. Planning a war out here? He asked, his voice gruff but tinged with amusement. Alice flinched, then relaxed. Something like that, she said, managing a small smile. I called a lawyer. He says I need evidence, but it's all in my house. Roy stepped closer, his gaze sharp. You don't stroll into enemy territory without a strategy, he said, tapping his temple. Back in my detective days, we used proxies, someone to get what we couldn't. Find a neutral party, someone they won't suspect. A neighbor, maybe. Or a delivery guy. Get creative. Alice's mind raced. A neighbor, Mrs. Hensley, who'd always been nosy but kind. Maybe she could help. You think that'd work? She asked. Roy shrugged, his lips twitching. Worked for me when I busted a smuggling ring in '82. he said. Just don't get caught. She nodded, her resolve hardening. Back in her room, she sat at the small desk, a cheap notebook open before her. The pen scratched as she wrote. Call Mrs. Hensley. Check bank records again. Ask Tom about property laws. She crossed out a line, then added, stay quiet. They can't know. Her handwriting was messy, but each word felt like a step toward control. She closed the notebook, her eyes falling on the photograph of Jacob. Her anger flared, but so did her determination. This is just the beginning, she whispered, her voice steady. She wasn't the woman they'd locked away. She was something more now, a fighter, ready to reclaim what was hers. Alice stood in the dimly lit corridor of Sunny Hills Care Center, the fluorescent lights flickering above her. The air was heavy with the scent of antiseptic, and the floor creaked under her cautious steps. Her fingers gripped the phone, trembling as she dialed Jacob's number. Her heart pounded, each beat fueled by the anger that had simmered since she discovered the unauthorized bank transactions. She needed answers, needed to hear his voice, even if it broke her. The corridor was silent, save for the distant hum of a vacuum cleaner, but she glanced over her shoulder, paranoid that someone might overhear. The phone rang once, twice, then clicked. Mom! Jacob's voice came through, clipped and impatient. What's up? Alice's breath caught, but she forced her voice to stay steady. Jacob, we need to talk, she said, her words sharp. I saw the bank statements. Money's gone thousands. Did you take it? Pause, then a sigh. It's just a mix-up, Mom, he said, his tone dismissive. You're blowing this out of proportion. Don't lie to me, Alice snapped, her voice rising. I know about the withdrawals. And the realty agency. Are you selling my house? Another pause, longer this time. She heard the faint buzz of a television in the background, a sound that twisted her gut. He was in her living room, her home where she'd raised him. You're confused, Jacob said finally, his voice colder now. The bank must have made an error. I'll look into it. Confused. Alice's hand tightened on the phone, her knuckles white. I let you and Lori live in my house. I trusted you. And now my money's gone and you're dodging me. Mom, stop, Jacob said, his voice sharp. You're making this harder than it needs to be. You're better off there in the home. Just let it go. Before she could respond, a laugh cut through the line, Lori's laugh, light and mocking. Alice's chest constricted, a lump forming in her throat. She pictured them sprawled on her couch, Lori's heels on her coffee table, laughing as they dismantled her life. Is that Lori? She asked, her voice trembling with fury. Put her on. Now. She's busy, Jacob said, his tone final. Igatego, Mom. We'll talk later. The line went dead. Alice stood frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear, the silence deafening. Her pulse roared, her anger a living thing clawing at her chest. She wanted to scream, to call back and demand the truth, but her legs felt heavy, rooted to the spot. The corridor seemed to close in, the flickering lights casting jagged shadows. A soft shuffle broke her trance. Marge stood at the end of the corridor, her silver hair glowing faintly under the lights. Heard you raising hell, Marge said, her lips twitching. Good for you. But he's lying through his teeth, isn't he? Alice lowered the phone, her hands still shaking. Like your son-in-law, she said, her voice bitter. He wouldn't even admit it. Marge crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. Boys like that think they're slick, she said. But lies leave tracks. Get more proof, Alice. Nail him. Alice nodded, her jaw tight. Marge's words were a lifeline, pulling her from the edge of despair. She slipped the phone into her pocket and headed back to her room, the corridor's chill seeping into her bones. Inside, the bare walls and plastic furniture mocked her, but she ignored them. She sat on the bed, pulling out the photograph of Jacob. His boyish grin stared back, a cruel reminder of the son she'd lost. Her fingers tightened on the frame, her eyes burning. You'll regret this, she whispered, her voice a vow. She wasn't done, not by a long shot. Alice sat on a sagging couch in the nursing home's common room, her notebook clutched in her lap. The room smelled of stale coffee and faintly of mothballs, its faded wallpaper peeling at the edges. A television in the corner droned on, spitting out commercials no one watched. Her pen scratched across the page, jotting down fragments of her plan after the call with Jacob. His lies had lit a fire in her, but she felt adrift, unsure of her next move. The notebook was her anchor, each word a step toward reclaiming her life. A shadow fell across her page. Planning a heist, are we? Marge's voice was bright, her grin mischievous as she plopped onto the couch beside Alice. Her silver hair was tucked into a loose bun, a few strands escaping to frame her sharp eyes. Alice managed a small smile, closing the notebook. Not quite. she said, her voice tight. Just trying to figure out how to fight back. Marge raised an eyebrow, then waved over Roy and Clara, who were lingering near a card table. Come on, you two, she called. Our girl's cooking up something big. Roy shuffled over, his old blazer hanging loose on his frame. He sank into an armchair, his calloused hands resting on his knees. Clara followed, her steps hesitant, her glasses slipping down her nose. She sat beside Alice, her hands folding nervously in her lap. The group felt like a makeshift council, their presence warming the sterile room. Spill it, Alice, Marge said, leaning forward. What happened with that son of yours? Alice exhaled, her fingers tightening on the notebook. I called Jacob, she said, her voice low. Asked about the money, the house. He lied, said it was a bank error. But I heard Lori laughing in the background. They're in my home, living my life, and he wouldn't even admit what they've done. Clara's hand reached out, squeezing Alice's arm. That's awful, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But you're not alone. Roy grunted, his eyes narrowing. Sounds like they're moving fast, he said, his voice gravelly. You need more than words to pin them down. I've got a guy, old colleague, private investigator. Name's Frank. He can check if your house is on the market, dig into their paperwork. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a yellowed business card, its edges frayed. Call him. He's discreet. Alice took the card, her fingers brushing the worn paper. Thank you, Roy, she said, her voice thick with gratitude. I don't know what I'd do without you all. Clara adjusted her glasses, her expression brightening. My niece Sarah works at a bank, she said, her voice gaining strength. She's good with numbers, knows how to spot funny business in accounts. I can ask her to look into those transactions for you. Alice's eyes widened. You'd do that? She asked, a spark of hope igniting in her chest. Of course, Clara said, a shy smile breaking through. We're family here. Marge clapped her hands, her grin wide. And if you really want to rattle their cage, post their nonsense online, she said, her eyes gleaming. Let the neighbors know what kind of snakes they are. Nothing scares folks like a little public shame. Alice laughed, the sound surprising her. Your trouble, Marge, she said, her tension easing for the first time that day. Proud of it, Marge replied, winking. Alice opened her notebook, scribbling down Frank's number and Sarah's name. The weight on her shoulders didn't vanish, but it felt lighter, shared among friends. She looked at them. Marge's defiance, Roy's quiet wisdom, Clara's gentle strength, and felt a surge of gratitude. She wasn't fighting alone. Back in her room, Alice stood by the small window, the glass streaked with rain. The sky was a heavy gray, but she didn't mind. She pressed her hand to the cool pane, her reflection faint but resolute. We're stronger together, she whispered, her voice steady. Her fight was just beginning, and with her new family behind her, she felt ready for whatever came next. Alice hunched over the ancient computer in the nursing home's library, the monitor's flicker casting a sickly glow on her face. The room was a tomb of dusty books and forgotten magazines, the air thick with the scent of mildew. Rain tapped against the window, a steady rhythm that matched the pounding in her chest. She'd come here to dig deeper, spurred by Marge's encouragement and Roy's advice. Her fingers, stiff but determined, typed the name of a local real estate site into the browser. The page loaded slowly, each second stretching her nerves taut. When the screen finally cleared, her breath stopped. There it was, her house. The listing stared back at her, bold and unapologetic. Charming 3-bedroom in quiet suburb. The main photo showed her living room, her embroidered curtains framing the windows, her oak coffee table gleaming under staged lighting. Her heart lurched, a sharp pain slicing through her. She scrolled down, her hands trembling, and saw the price. $450,000. Listed by Jacob and Lori Crow. Her vision blurred, the words swimming. She clicked on the photos, each one a fresh wound. The kitchen where she'd baked Jacob's birthday cakes. The hallway where he'd ridden his tricycle. Her bedroom, now stripped of her quilt, labeled as a spacious master suite. Lori's words echoed in her mind. This'll make a great walk-in closet. The betrayal wasn't new, but seeing it laid bare, advertised for strangers to bid on, was a gut punch. She grabbed her phone, her fingers fumbling as she dialed Frank, Roy's private investigator. The line rang, each tone amplifying her dread. Frank Malone. A calm, professional voice answered. This is Alice Crow, she said, her voice shaking. Roy gave me your number. My house, it's on a real estate site. My son and his wife listed it. I didn't approve this. A pause, then the sound of papers rustling. Give me the address, Frank said, his tone even. She did, and he typed, the clicks audible through the phone. Yep, it's listed. Posted 2 days ago. Sellers are Jacob and Lori Crow. They're moving fast. Open house this weekend. Alice's stomach churned. They forged my signature to put me in a nursing home, she said, her voice rising. They're stealing everything. Can you stop this? I can dig into the paperwork, Frank said, his voice steady. Find out how they're justifying the sale. But you'll need hard evidence. Deeds, bank records, anything showing you're the rightful owner. Got anything like that? Some papers, Alice said, her mind racing. I grabbed a few when they forced me out. Good, Frank said. Send me copies. I'll start sniffing around. But stay quiet for now. If they know you're onto them, they'll cover their tracks. She hung up, her hands still trembling. The library felt suffocating, the rain louder now like a drumbeat. She stumbled back to her room, her legs unsteady. Inside, she opened her suitcase, pulling out a small folder of documents she'd taken from her desk. Her fingers flipped through them. Bills, receipts, and then there it was. A contract for the nursing home, her signature scrawled at the bottom. It wasn't hers. The ink was too sharp, the loops too perfect. Tears welled, spilling down her cheeks. She sank onto the bed, the paper crumpling in her fist. A soft knock startled her. Marge stood in the doorway, her eyes softening as she saw Alice's face. Oh, honey, Marge said, crossing the room. She pulled Alice into a hug, her arms strong despite her age. You're tougher than this. Don't let them break you. Alice clung to her, the tears slowing. They're selling my house, she whispered, her voice raw. It's real now. Marge pulled back, her hands on Alice's shoulders. Then fight harder, she said, her voice fierce. You've got us. You've got proof. Use it. Alice nodded, wiping her eyes. She straightened the document, her fingers steadying. Her gaze fell on Jacob's photograph, but this time she didn't flinch. This is my home, she whispered, her voice ablade. And I'm taking it back. Alice sat at a chipped plastic table in the nursing home's meeting room, her fingers nervously shuffling a thin stack of documents. The room smelled of burnt coffee and old carpet, its beige walls adorned with a single faded painting of a sailboat. A fluorescent bulb buzzed overhead, casting a harsh light that made her squint. Her heart raced as she waited for Tom, her old friend and lawyer, to arrive. The documents, bills, receipts, the forged nursing home contract, felt like her lifeline, proof that her life hadn't been erased. She smoothed a creased page, her hands trembling with anticipation. The door creaked open and Tom stepped in, his gray hair neatly combed, his navy suit crisp despite the early hour. He carried a thick folder, his face set with determination. Alice, he said, his voice warm but firm. We've got a fight on our hands, but we can win this. Alice managed a tight smile, her stomach nodding. I hope so, she said, sliding the documents toward him. This is all I have. Tom sat across from her, opening his folder and spreading out notes. The forged signature on the nursing home contract is our trump card, he said, tapping the paper with a pen. It's clear fraud. If we can prove Jacob and Lori acted without your consent, we can challenge the house sale. Alice leaned forward, her pulse quickening. How do we do that? She asked, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. Tom flipped through her documents, his eyes scanning the pages. We need evidence of their financial misconduct, he said. Bank records showing those unauthorized withdrawals, any correspondence with the real estate agency, anything tying them to the fraud. Do you have anything else? Maybe at the house. Alice's mind flashed to her old oak desk in the study, a drawer stuffed with bank statements and letters she'd never thrown out. Lori, with her sleek gadgets and disdain for clutter, wouldn't have bothered with it. There's a drawer, she said, her voice brightening. In my study. It's got years of papers, statements, maybe even something about the house. Tom nodded, jotting a note. Good. We'll need to get those, but discreetly. For now, I can file for a temporary injunction to halt the sale. It'll buy us time to build the case. An injunction? Alice asked, her brow furrowing. A court order, Tom said, his pen pausing. It stops the sale until we can prove you're the rightful owner. But we need to move fast. The open house is this weekend. Alice's chest tightened at the thought of strangers traipsing through her home. But Tom's plan sparked a flicker of hope. Do it, she said, her voice firm. Whatever it takes. The door opened and Marge poked her head in, balancing a tray with 2 mugs of tea. Thought you'd need fuel for this legal war, she said, her eyes twinkling as she set the tray down. Don't let those snakes slither away, Alice. Alice laughed, the sound easing her tension. Thanks, Marge, she said, taking a mug. I'm not letting them win. Marge winked and slipped out, leaving Alice and Tom to their work. They spent another hour mapping out steps, subpoenas for bank records, a request for the forged contract to be examined by a handwriting expert. Alice felt a surge of control, each decision a brick in the wall she was building against Jacob and Lori. Back in her room, Alice sat at her small desk, the dim light casting shadows across the bare walls. She opened her notebook, her pen scratching as she wrote. Injunction. Get papers from house. Subpoena bank. Her handwriting was sharp, purposeful. She glanced at the photograph of Jacob, his boyish grin a faint echo of the past. I'm coming for my home, she whispered, her eyes blazing. The fight was on, and she was ready. Alice hunched over the library's ancient computer, the hum of its fan a low growl in the quiet room. The air was thick with dust, the shelves around her sagging under the weight of forgotten books. Her eyes were glued to the screen as an email from Sarah, Clara's niece, popped into her inbox. Her heart skipped a beat. She clicked it open, her breath catching as she scanned the attached report. It was damning. Bank transfers from Alice's account to one in Lori's name, dated just days after Alice was sent to the nursing home. Her fists clenched, nails digging into her palms. They thought they'd won, but she was about to make them squirm. She grabbed her phone and dialed Sarah, her fingers steady despite the fire in her chest. Sarah, it's Alice, she said, keeping her voice low. I got your report. It's exactly what I needed. Sarah's voice was crisp, professional. I cross-checked the transactions, she said. Those transfers weren't authorized by you. I flagged them for the bank, but you'll need to file a formal complaint. Thank you, Alice said, her voice thick with gratitude. This means everything. She hung up and immediately called Frank, Roy's private investigator. The line crackled, then cleared. Malone, Frank said, his tone brisk. Frank, it's Alice Crow, she said, her words tumbling out. I have proof, bank transfers to Lori's account. And the house is still listed. Can we slow them down? Frank chuckled, a low, approving sound. Smart move, getting the bank records, he said. Here's an idea. I can pose as a buyer, set up fake viewings. It'll keep them chasing their tails, thinking they've got deals while we stall the sale. Alice's lips curved, a spark of triumph igniting. Do it, she said. Make them run. Consider it done, Frank said. I'll have a couple of buyers call the agency today. They'll be too busy to notice what's coming. She thanked him and hung up, her mind racing. She pictured Jacob and Lori in her living room, scrambling to tidy up for non-existent buyers, their smugness unraveling. The thought was intoxicating. She slipped out of the library and headed to the garden, where Roy sat on a weathered bench, his blazer draped over the armrest. The roses were wilted, but the air was fresh, a relief after the library's staleness. Got that look in your eye? Roy said, squinting at her. What's cooking? Alice sat beside him, her voice low but eager. Frank's setting up fake viewings for the house, she said. Sarah found proof of Lori's transfers. We're hitting them where it hurts. Roy let out a raspy laugh, slapping his knee. You've got them dancing, Alice, he said, his eyes gleaming. Wrap them around your finger. She grinned, the weight on her chest lifting. It's a start, she said, her voice steady. Back in the library, Alice sat at the computer, refreshing the real estate site. The listing was still active, but she imagined Jacob's phone buzzing with calls, Lori's heels clicking as she rushed to stage the house. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, her smile sharp. This is just the beginning, she whispered, her voice a quiet vow. She leaned back, the hum of the computer fading as her mind churned with the next step. Alice sat in the nursing home's guest room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The room was a study in artificial cheer. Plastic chairs arranged in a stiff circle, a vase of fake daisies on a side table, their petals coated in dust. The air smelled of lemon cleaner, too sharp to be comforting. Her pulse quickened as she heard footsteps approaching, the familiar cadence of Lori's heels mixed with Jacob's heavier tread. She steeled herself, forcing her face into a mask of calm. She'd play their game for now. The door swung open, and Lori swept in, her blonde hair gleaming, a cheap bouquet of carnations clutched in her manicured hands. Alice, darling, she cooed, her smile wide but her eyes cold. We've missed you so much. Jacob trailed behind, his shoulders hunched, a paper bag of groceries in his arms. He mumbled a greeting, his eyes fixed on the floor. Alice took the bouquet, her fingers brushing the waxy petals. How thoughtful, she said, her voice soft but edged with irony. She set the flowers on the table, noting their faint gas station scent. It's been a while. Lori perched on a chair, crossing her legs with practiced grace. We've been so busy, she said, her tone dripping with false warmth. But we wanted to make sure you're settling in. This place is nice, isn't it? Alice's jaw tightened, but she nodded, keeping her expression neutral. It's fine, she said, her eyes flicking to Jacob. He shifted uncomfortably, still avoiding her gaze. How's the house? I heard there's been some trouble with the sale. Lori's smile faltered, her fingers tightening on her purse. Oh, just a few hiccups, she said, her voice a touch too bright. Nothing we can't handle. Jacob coughed, setting the grocery bag on the table. Yeah, just picky buyers, he said, his words stumbling. He rubbed the back of his neck, his eyes darting to Lori. Alice tilted her head, her voice deceptively gentle. Must be stressful, she said. All those viewings and no offers yet? She watched them closely, catching the way Lori's lips pursed, the way Jacob's shoulders tensed. Her heart raced, but she kept her tone light, as if she were just making conversation. It's under control, Lori said, her smile returning sharper now. You don't need to worry about it, Alice. Just focus on resting. Alice's mind flashed to her house, her kitchen, now likely cluttered with Lori's gadgets. Her paintings, replaced by generic art for the sale. The image fueled her anger, but she swallowed it, leaning back in her chair. Resting, she repeated, her voice soft. Of course. The door creaked, and Marge poked her head in, her silver hair catching the light. Nice flowers, she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Straight from the gas station, huh? She grinned, her eyes locking on Lori, who flushed a faint pink. They're lovely, Alice said, her lips twitching as she met Marge's gaze. Thank you for stopping by, Marge. Marge gave a mock salute and sauntered off, leaving a tense silence in her wake. Lori cleared her throat, standing abruptly. We should get going, she said, smoothing her skirt. Busy day. Jacob nodded, still not meeting Alice's eyes. Yeah, we'll come back soon, he said, his voice hollow. Alice watched them leave, the door clicking shut behind them. She sat alone, the bouquet scent cloying in the small room. Her fingers traced the petals, her mind replaying their nervous glances, their thin excuses. They were rattled, and she'd barely begun. A slow smile spread across her face, sharp and certain. They don't know what's coming, she whispered, her voice a quiet promise. She stood, the fake daisies watching as she planned her next move. Alice hunched over the library's creaky computer, the monitor's dim glow casting shadows across her face. The room smelled of mildew and old paper, the shelves around her groaning with dusty books. Her fingers trembled as she typed a post for the local community's social media group, each word a spark of defiance. She hesitated, her thumb hovering over the enter key. The cursor blinked, taunting her. Marge's voice echoed in her mind. Make some noise. She took a shaky breath, uploaded a scanned image of the forged nursing home contract. Thanks to Sarah's help, and pressed publish. Her heart thudded, a mix of fear and exhilaration washing over her. The post was raw, unpolished. My son Jacob and his wife Lori forced me into a nursing home, forged my signature, and are selling my home. I raised him there. This is my proof. The photo of the contract, with its too perfect signature, stared back at her from the screen. She leaned back, her hands clammy, the hum of the computer's fan filling the silence. Had she gone too far? She pushed the thought away and slipped out of the library, her steps quick on the linoleum floor. In the common room, the air was warmer, tinged with the scent of instant coffee. Marge, Roy, and Clara sat on sagging couches, their faces lit with anticipation. A muted game show buzzed on the television, ignored by all. Alice joined them, her notebook clutched to her chest. It's done, she said, her voice low but firm. The post is up. Roy pulled out his ancient smartphone, its screen cracked but functional. Let's see the damage, he said, his gravelly voice tinged with amusement. He opened the group page, and his lips twitched into a grin. Well, damn. You've got the neighbors in a tizzy. Alice leaned over, her breath catching. Comments were pouring in. That's disgraceful. From a former coworker. I saw Lori with a realtor last week. From Mrs. Hensley, her old neighbor. We're with you, Alice. From a local shop owner. Her chest swelled, a rush of validation warming her. The community she'd built over decades was rallying behind her. Marge clapped her hands, her silver hair bouncing. That's the kind of ruckus I'm talking about, she said, her eyes gleaming. They'll be sweating now. Clara adjusted her glasses, her voice soft but steady. People are angry, she said, squeezing Alice's hand. You're not alone. Alice's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it, her pulse quickening. A private message from Mrs. Hensley. Saw Lori with a realtor at your house. She was bragging about a big sale. Let me know how I can help. Alice's lips curved, a spark of hope igniting. The truth was spreading, and it was on her side. But as the excitement faded, a chill crept in. She pictured Jacob's cold voice from their last call, his dismissal of her accusations. What if he saw the post? What if he came for her, angrier than before? Her fingers tightened on her notebook, her confidence wavering. She couldn't back down now. but the fear lingered sharp and unyielding. Later in her room, Alice stood by the small window, the night sky a heavy black beyond the glass. The room was stark, its plastic furniture and bare walls a far cry from her cozy home. She pressed her hand to the cold pane, her reflection faint but resolute. Pride surged through her, she'd taken a stand, and the world was listening. But fear gnawed at her, a whisper of what might come next. "I did it," she whispered, her voice trembling with both courage and dread. Her eyes flicked to Jacob's photograph, its presence a quiet challenge. Alice sat at the plastic table in the nursing home's meeting room, her hands clasped to steady their trembling. The room was cramped, its air thick with the scent of ink and paper from the documents strewn before her. A single window let in gray morning light, illuminating Tom, who stood at the head of the table, his suit jacket slung over a chair. His eyes burned with purpose as he slapped a folder down. "The lawsuit's filed," he said, his voice ringing with confidence. "We're hitting Jacob and Lori where it hurts." Alice's heart leapt, a surge of hope cutting through her nerves. "It's really happening?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tom nodded, flipping open the folder. "We've got the forged signature, the unauthorized bank transfers and Sarah's report," he said, tapping a stack of papers. "It's enough to challenge the house sale. The court will issue a temporary injunction to stop it while we build the case." Alice exhaled, her shoulders easing slightly. "How long will that take?" she asked, her eyes locked on his. "Could be weeks, maybe months," Tom said, his tone measured. "But the injunction buys us time. We need more evidence. Anything tying them to the real estate agency, emails, texts. You've got anything else?" Alice reached into her bag, pulling out a printed message from Mrs. Hensley and Sarah's latest report. "This," she said, sliding them across the table. "My neighbor saw Lori with a realtor, and Sarah found more transfers to Lori's account." Tom's lips curved a rare smile. "This strengthens our hand," he said, tucking the papers into his folder. "We're building a wall they can't climb." The meeting stretched on, Tom outlining subpoenas for bank records, and a request for a handwriting analysis. Alice scribbled notes, her pen scratching fiercely. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of her life. When they finished, she headed to the library, craving a moment to check the fallout from her social media post. The room was dim, the computer screen flickering as she logged into the community group. Comments flooded the page. "Shame on them. We've got your back, Alice." Her chest swelled, the support a balm to her battered heart. But then she saw it, a post from Lori, sharp and venomous. "Don't believe her lies. She's ungrateful, confused, and dragging our family through the mud." Alice's breath caught, her fingers curling into fists. The audacity of it burned, but it also steeled her. Lori was rattled, lashing out. That meant they were winning. A shadow fell across the desk. Roy stood behind her, his old blazer rumpled but his eyes sharp. "Saw that nonsense from your daughter-in-law," he said, tapping his phone. "She's scared. The whole town's talking and it's all on your side." Alice managed a tight smile. "It's working, isn't it?" she said, her voice low. "The pressure." Roy nodded, his fingers drumming on the desk. "Keep it up," he said. "They're cracking." She logged off, her mind racing. The support was exhilarating, but Jacob's silence worried her. Would he confront her again? The thought sent a shiver down her spine, but she pushed it aside. She was in control now, and the truth was her weapon. Back in her room, Alice sat at her desk, her notebook open. She sketched a flowchart, injunctions, subpoenas, gather papers from house, her pen moving with precision. The dim light cast long shadows, but her focus was unwavering. She glanced at Jacob's photograph, its presence a quiet ache. "I'm almost there," she whispered, her voice fierce. Her plan was taking shape, and nothing would stop her now. Alice sat in the nursing home's guest room, her hands folded in her lap, the plastic chair creaking beneath her. The room felt smaller today, its fake daisies and lemon-scented air stifling. Her pulse quickened as the door opened, revealing Jacob alone, his face haggard, his eyes red-rimmed. His jacket was wrinkled, his hands trembling as he shut the door behind him. He looked like the boy she'd raised, but the weight of his betrayal hung between them, heavy and unyielding. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking. "You have to stop this. The lawsuit, the posts, you're ruining my life." Alice's breath caught, her heart twisting at the sight of him. He looked broken, but she steeled herself, her jaw tightening. "Ruining your life?" she said, her voice low but sharp. "You put me here, Jacob. You sold my home. What did you expect?" He sank into a chair, his hands raking through his hair. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Lori, she said it was the best thing. For us. I didn't know it'd go this far. Alice's mind flashed to their old living room, the nights she'd read him bedtime stories, his small body curled against hers. The memory stung, but it couldn't erase the truth. You lived in my house, she said, her voice trembling with anger. I gave you everything and you forged my name, stole my money. Don't you dare ask for mercy now. Jacob's eyes met hers, glistening with tears. I remember those nights, Mom, he said, his voice thick. The stories, the picnics by the lake. I didn't want this. Lori, she pushed me. She said we needed the money, that you'd be better off here. I was weak, okay? But I'm your son. Give me a chance to fix it. Her heart wavered, the love she'd always carried for him clashing with the pain he'd caused. She wanted to believe him, to see the boy who'd once clung to her. But his words rang hollow, tainted by Lori's laughter, by the forged signature that had stripped her of her home. Fix it, she said, her voice hardening. You stood by while she planned to turn my bedroom into a closet. How do I trust you now? He flinched, his shoulders slumping. Please, Mom, he whispered. Drop the lawsuit. I'll make it right. I swear. Before she could respond, the door burst open. Marge stood there, her silver hair wild, her eyes blazing. You've got some nerve, boy, she snapped, her arms crossed. Coming here begging after what you did. Get out before I call security. Jacob's face crumpled, but he stood, his movements slow, defeated. I'm sorry, he mumbled, his voice barely audible as he slipped past Marge and out the door. Alice sat frozen, her chest tight. She wanted to call him back, to hold him, but her anger anchored her to the chair. Marge's hand rested on her shoulder, warm and steady. You did good holding your ground, Marge said, her voice softer now. He doesn't deserve your tears. Alice nodded, but her heart ached. She rose, her legs unsteady, and walked to the corridor, its flickering lights casting jagged shadows. The silence pressed against her, her thoughts a storm of love and betrayal. Had she been too hard on him? Could he really change? The questions gnawed at her, each one a weight. In her room, she sank onto the bed, the springs creaking under her. The dim light fell on Jacob's photograph, his boyish grin a cruel reminder of what they'd lost. Tears welled, spilling down her cheeks. What do I do? She whispered, her voice breaking. Her fingers traced the frame, her heart torn between justice and the son she still loved. Alice sat hunched on a worn couch in the nursing home's common room, her fingers clutching the photograph of Jacob. Tears streaked her cheeks, the weight of his pleading words still crushing her chest. The room smelled of herbal tea and faintly of antiseptic, its faded curtains letting in slivers of late afternoon light. A television murmured in the corner, its game show jingle a distant hum. The photograph's edges were worn, Jacob's boyish grin a painful reminder of the son who'd begged her to stop her fight. Her heart ached, torn between love and the justice she'd fought so hard for. Marge's voice broke the silence, sharp and commanding. This ain't no place for tears, Alice, she declared, striding over with her silver hair bouncing. She plopped onto the couch, her eyes narrowing as she took in Alice's face. What's got you like this? Spill it. Alice wiped her eyes, her voice shaky. Jacob came to see me, she said, her fingers tightening on the frame. He begged me to drop the lawsuit, said I'm ruining his life. He looks so broken. What if I lose him for good? Marge waved a hand, her bracelets jangling. Lose him, she said, her tone fierce but warm. Honey, he lost you the moment he signed that fake paper. My daughter did the same. Cut me off for her fancy life. Broke my heart, sure, but I found my real family here. She gestured to the room, her smile softening. You've got us now. Roy shuffled over, his old blazer creased but his gaze steady. He sank into an armchair, his calloused hands resting on his knees. Kids playing on your heartstrings, he said, his voice gravelly. Back in '79, I took down a con man who scammed widows. He cried too when I caught him. Didn't mean he was sorry, just scared. Truth wins, Alice, if you don't back down. Clara, quiet as ever, slipped onto the couch beside Alice, her small frame barely denting the cushions. She pulled a folded handkerchief from her pocket and pressed it into Alice's hand. You're doing what's right, she said, her voice soft but firm, her glasses glinting. It's hard, but it's worth it. Her fingers squeezed Alice's, a gentle anchor. Alice's throat tightened, their words weaving a net of strength around her. She looked at them, Marge's fiery defiance, Roy's weathered wisdom, Clara's quiet resolve, and felt the fog of doubt lifting. I don't know how to thank you, she said, her voice steadier now. You've kept me going. Marge grinned, nudging her shoulder. Thank us by winning, she said, her eyes twinkling. Then throw us a party in that house of yours. Alice managed a small laugh, the sound loosening the knot in her chest. She slipped the photograph into her pocket and stood, her legs steadier. Deal, she said, her smile fragile but real. Later in the garden, Alice sat on a cracked bench, the air cool and tinged with the scent of damp earth. The roses were wilted, but the quiet was soothing. She thought of Marge's story, Roy's advice, Clara's handkerchief. They weren't just friends. They were her shield, her strength. Her doubts about Jacob lingered, but their support drowned out the fear. Back in her room, Alice opened her notebook, the dim light casting shadows across the page. She wrote, "Thank you, Marge, Roy, Clara. You're my family now." Her pen moved with purpose, each word a vow to keep fighting. She stood by the window, the glass cool against her palm, the night sky a deep indigo. "I'm not alone," she whispered, her voice fierce. Her resolve hardened, ready for the verdict that loomed ahead. Alice sat rigid in the nursing home's meeting room, her hands wrapped around her phone, its screen dark but heavy with promise. The room was stark, its plastic table scratched, the air thick with the faint scent of paper and dust. A single bulb flickered overhead, casting uneven light across her tense face. Her heart pounded, each beat a drumroll for the call she'd been waiting for. Tom had promised news about the court verdict today, and the weight of it pressed against her chest. She glanced at the clock, 5 minutes past noon. Her fingers tightened, the phone's edges biting into her palms. It rang, a sharp trill that made her jump. She answered, her voice barely steady. "Tom," she said, her breath shallow. "Alice, we did it." Tom's voice burst through, vibrant with triumph. "The judge ruled in your favor. The forged signature was undeniable, sales voided, and the house is yours. Jacob and Lori have to vacate within a week." Alice's breath caught, tears springing to her eyes. "We won," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It's really mine again." "All yours," Tom said, his tone warm. "The court saw through their lies. They're also ordered to repay the unauthorized withdrawals. You're free, Alice." Tears spilled down her cheeks, a mix of joy and relief. "Thank you, Tom," she said, her voice thick. "I couldn't have done this without you." "You fought for it," Tom said. "I'll handle the paperwork. Go celebrate." She hung up, her hands shaking as she clutched the phone. Her chest swelled, the weight of months lifting. She stood, her legs unsteady, and ran to the dining hall, where Marge, Roy, and Clara sat at a long table, sipping tea and nibbling stale cookies. The room smelled of sugar and disinfectant, its plastic tables dotted with paper napkins. The residents turned as she burst in, her face alight. "I won," Alice cried, her voice ringing. "The house is mine again." Marge leapt up, her silver hair flying as she clapped. "Hot damn, girl," she shouted, pulling Alice into a hug. "You showed those snakes." Roy's lips curved, a rare grin breaking through. "Knew you'd pull it off," he said, raising his tea mug. "To Alice, toughest fighter I know." Clara's eyes shimmered as she stood, wrapping Alice in a gentle embrace. "I'm so proud of you," she said, her voice soft but fierce. The other residents joined in, their applause filling the room, a chorus of cheers and whistles. Marge grabbed a tray of cookies, passing them around like a victory feast. "This calls for a party," she said, her eyes twinkling. "We're coming to your housewarming, right?" Alice laughed, the sound bright and free. "You're all invited," she said, her heart full. Roy leaned back, his expression sobering. "Watch your back, though," he said, his voice low. "Jacob might not go quietly." Marge waved a hand, scoffing. "Let him try," she said. "He's got no ground left to stand on." Alice nodded, but Roy's words stirred a flicker of unease. She pictured Jacob's haggard face, his desperate pleas. Would he fight back? The thought lingered, but the joy of her victory drowned it out. She was going home, her home reclaimed. Later in her room, Alice stood by her suitcase, her fingers tracing the keys to her house. The room's dim light fell on the bare walls, but the keys gleamed, a symbol of her triumph. She held them tightly, their cool metal grounding her. "I did it," she whispered, her voice radiant. Her eyes drifted to Jacob's photograph, its presence a quiet question, but she turned away, her focus on the future. Alice stood before her front door, the house keys cold and solid in her hand. The evening air was crisp, tinged with the scent of cut grass from a neighbor's lawn. Her heart thudded as she slid the key into the lock, the familiar creak of the hinges a sound she'd dreamed of for months. The door swung open, revealing the living room, its oak floor gleaming under the soft glow of a single lamp. She stepped inside, her breath catching. She was home. The room was both hers and not. Her old couch sat in its usual spot, but new curtains, Lori's gaudy and floral, hung in place of her embroidered ones. A faint whiff of Lori's perfume lingered, sharp and unwelcome. Alice's lips tightened as she scanned the space. Her paintings, once lining the walls, were gone, replaced by bare nails. Her anger flared, but she pushed it down. This was her house now, and she'd make it hers again. She moved through the rooms, each step a reclaiming. In the kitchen, her mismatched plates were stacked as she'd left them, but a sleek blender, Lori's, sat on the counter, an intruder. She ran her fingers along the wooden cabinets, their warmth grounding her. Memories flooded back. Baking pies with Jacob, his small hands dusted with flour. The past was here, woven into every corner, and she'd fought to keep it. In her bedroom she paused, her chest tightening. Her bed was bare. The quilt she'd sewn for Jacob tossed into a corner like trash. She knelt, lifting it to her face, the faint scent of lavender stirring tears. She'd made this for him when he was a boy. Each stitch a promise of love. She hugged it close, her eyes stinging, but her resolve held. She'd rebuild stitch by stitch. The hallway held another surprise. Cardboard boxes hastily packed, labeled with Jacob's scrawl. Clothes, books, a laptop charger. Remnants of his life, left behind as he and Lori fled the court's ruling. She touched a box, her fingers lingering. Part of her wanted to open it, to find some trace of the son she'd raised, but she pulled back. That was for another day. Her phone buzzed, and she answered, a smile breaking through. "Marge," she said, her voice light. "How's your castle, Queen?" Marge's voice was warm, laced with mischief. "Got those snakes' junk cleared out yet?" Alice laughed, the sound echoing in the quiet house. "Working on it," she said. "Thank you, Marge. For everything." "Don't get sappy," Marge said, chuckling. "Just invite us over when you're settled." "Promise," Alice said, hanging up. She stood in the living room, the photograph of Jacob in her hands. His grin was a shadow of the past, but it no longer broke her. She'd won her home, her life. Yet thoughts of Jacob lingered, a quiet ache. They'd need to talk, to face what was left of their bond. She stepped onto the porch, the evening sky a soft purple. The air was cool, carrying the promise of a new start. She breathed deeply, her shoulders relaxing. "This is my home," she whispered, her voice steady. The photograph felt lighter in her hand, its weight no longer a burden, but a question for tomorrow. Alice stood in her living room. The soft creak of the floorboards under her feet a reminder of her reclaimed home. The air smelled of polished wood and fresh paint. Her paintings back on the walls, but a few cardboard boxes, Jacob's hastily packed, lurked in the corner, a silent testament to the past. The evening light filtered through her embroidered curtains, casting a warm glow. A sharp knock at the door jolted her, her heart lurching. She crossed the room, her hand hesitating on the knob before she opened it. Jacob stood on the porch, his face pale, his eyes sunken with exhaustion. His jacket was rumpled, his shoulders slumped, a shadow of the man she'd raised. "Mom, please," he said, his voice low, almost a plea. "Can we talk?" Alice's chest tightened, a storm of anger and pity swirling within her. She stepped aside, her voice cool but steady. "Come in," she said, gesturing to the living room. Her eyes flicked to the boxes, a bitter reminder of his betrayal. Jacob shuffled inside, his hands stuffed in his pockets. He glanced around, his gaze lingering on the familiar couch, the restored paintings. "It looks like it used to," he said, his voice cracking. "Like when I was a kid." Alice picked up the family photograph from the coffee table, her fingers tracing the frame. "Don't," she said, her voice sharp. "Don't act like nothing's changed." She set the photograph down, her eyes meeting his. "You forged my signature, Jacob. You sold my home. Why are you here?" He flinched, his hands rising as if to shield himself. "I know I messed up," he said, his voice trembling. "Lori, she convinced me it was the right thing. Said we needed the money, that you'd be better off in the home. I was stupid, Mom. I was weak. But I'm sorry." His eyes glistened, tears welling as he stepped closer. "Remember the summers here? You teaching me to ride a bike out front? I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose you." Alice's mind flashed to those summers, Jacob's laughter echoing in the yard, her hand steadying his wobbly bike. The memory was a knife cutting deep, but the pain of his betrayal was sharper. "You lived in my house," she said, her voice quivering with fury. "I gave you everything, and you let her turn my bedroom into a closet. You don't get to come back and beg for forgiveness like it's that easy." Jacob's tears spilled over, his shoulders shaking. "I know," he whispered. "I hate myself for it. Lori's gone. She left when the court ruled against us. I'm alone now, Mom. Please give me a chance to make this right." Alice's heart wavered, the love she'd always carried for him clashing with the scars he'd left. She wanted to believe him, to see the boy who'd once run to her for comfort. But trust was a fragile thing, shattered by his choices. "If you want a chance," she said, her voice firm despite the ache in her chest, "leave Lori for good. Return every cent you took. Then we'll talk. Not before. Jacob's face crumpled, his hands clenching. I'm trying, he said, his voice barely audible. I don't know if I can, but I'll try. He looked at her, his eyes pleading, but she held his gaze, unyielding. She turned away, her chest tight, and walked to the hallway. The air was cooler there, the scuffed floorboards grounding her. She gripped the doorframe, her thoughts a tangle of love and resolve. Could he change? Did she owe him a chance, or was her dignity worth more? The questions pressed against her, heavy and unanswered. She returned to the living room, her steps slow. Jacob stood where she'd left him, his face a mask of hope and fear. She met his eyes, her own brimming with pain. What am I supposed to do with you? She whispered, her voice a raw confession. The photograph on the table seemed to watch, its silence a weight between them. Alice stood at her kitchen counter, her hands sinking into soft dough, the scent of vanilla curling through the air. The morning light streamed through the window, warming the wooden cabinet she'd polished to a gleam. Her mismatched plates were stacked neatly, Laurie's sleek gadgets long gone. The hum of the oven filled the quiet, a gentle rhythm that matched her steady breaths. She shaped the dough for a lemon chiffon pie, the same recipe she'd made for her 58th birthday. But this time there was no dread, no tension. The house was hers again, and so was her peace. She moved to the living room, her steps light on the oak floor. The space was restored, her embroidered curtains back in place, her paintings lining the walls, each one a reclaiming of her past. She arranged a few photographs on the mantel, one of her late husband, another of her with Marge, Roy, and Clara, their smiles bright from the nursing home's dining hall. The photograph of Jacob, though, she slipped into a drawer, its presence too heavy for now. She wasn't ready to decide what to do with him, but the door to that choice remained ajar. Outside, in the garden, Alice knelt in the soft earth, her hands planting tulip bulbs. The air was crisp, carrying the chirp of sparrows and the faint scent of damp soil. She pressed the dirt down, her fingers steady, and thought of her friends. Marge's fiery spirit, Roy's quiet wisdom, Clara's gentle strength. They'd been her lifeline, her new family when her own had faltered. She smiled, wiping sweat from her brow, grateful for the roots she'd grown in the unlikeliest of places. Her phone buzzed, and she answered, leaning against a garden bench. Marge, she said, her voice warm. Checking up on me already? Damn right, Your Majesty, Marge said, her laugh crackling through the line. How's that castle treating you? Got room for us commoners to come for tea? Alice chuckled, the sound bright in the open air. Anytime, she said. I owe you all a proper party. You saved me, you know. Don't go soft on me, Marge said, her tone teasing. Just don't forget us now that you're living the high life. Never, Alice promised, her heart full. She hung up, tucking the phone into her pocket, and returned to her planting, the earth cool under her hands. Back inside, she sat at the kitchen table, the dough now baking, its aroma wrapping the room in comfort. She opened her notebook, its pages filled with plans and gratitude. Her mind wandered to the future, maybe volunteering at the community center, or taking up painting again. Her life stretched before her, open and uncharted, a canvas she could shape. Jacob's shadow lingered, a faint ache, but she didn't dwell on it. She'd face that when the time came. As the sun dipped low, Alice settled in the living room, a mug of tea in her hands. The window framed a sunset, its oranges and pinks bleeding into the sky. She leaned back, her shoulders relaxed, the house a quiet embrace around her. This is my beginning, she whispered, her voice soft but certain. Her eyes traced the horizon, a smile tugging at her lips, ready for whatever lay ahead. If you liked this story, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments where you listened to it from. We also recommend listening to our previous story. It is even more shocking. Just click on the box on the left to play it. Thank you for watching.